espero que esteja tudo bem com você. Mas se não estiver, eu espero que fique com esse vídeo. I'll take this opportunity to reply a request from low something. Eu vou usar esse vídeo para atender um pedido de uma pessoa que comentou no meu vídeo de português versus inglês, que era low alguma coisa, que eu não lembro. Ela pediu ele, não sei, acho que é ela, pra eu fazer vídeos assim, alternando entre voz suave e sussurro, e alternando entre inglês e português. Esse vídeo, this video, will not be entirely Portuguese, but most of it in English. Esse vídeo não vai ser inteiramente em português, a maior parte dele vai ser em inglês, porque eu tô fazendo essa introdução dessa forma, mas eu vou alternar entre voz suave e sussurro, porque essa pessoa pediu, e eu vou tentar falar assim, mais devagar. I'll try to speak slower because I have a really big problem with talking too fast, and in an ASMR that's not such a good thing. Eu vou tentar falar mais devagar porque eu realmente tenho um problema falando mais rápido, e no ASMR isso não é tão bom. Então tô fazendo essa introdução em homenagem a essa pessoa que pediu há muito tempo. She requested me a long time ago, like about 2 months ago, and now I'm doing it. Ela pediu uns 2 meses e agora eu tô fazendo. Mas esse é um vídeo de leitura, então eu vou estar lendo esse livro em inglês, que são contos. I'll be reading this, I would say reading this video. I'll be reading this book from Lovecraft. Esse é o livro de Lovecraft. Selected Stories from Calling Classics. Então esse é o livro Selected Stories do Lovecraft, que é em inglês, com um inglês muito arcaico. Devo dizer que eu tenho dificuldade de entender, e eu sou professora de inglês, mas são palavras muito antigas. Então eu vou ler esse livro. I'm gonna read this book. Eu vou ler esse livro em inglês, e pra quem gosta de ouvir outro idioma, seja entendendo e querendo praticar a escuta, ou simplesmente porque talvez gosta de um inaudível, ou gosta de um idioma diferente, this video is for you. So if you like videos with different languages or inaudible, this video is for you. Esse vídeo vai ser pra você, vídeo de leitura, e vai ser diferente do vídeo de Orgulho e Preconceito, porque eu cansei de trazer Orgulho e Preconceito, acho que vocês também, né? I am tired of reading Orgulho, Pride and Prejudice, and I will not bring anymore a list for a while. Não vou trazer Orgulho e Preconceito, pelo menos por enquanto. Mas sem mais delongas, because I've been too much time here, eu vou ler então esse livro aqui. Eu adoro fazer ASMR com o livro. I love to do ASMR with books, tipo tapping, sons de página. Então eu não escolhi antes, I didn't choose before, o conto que eu vou ler. The tale that I'm gonna read. E aqui tem a história do William Collins, que foi o moço que publicou a história de Lovecraft. Here we have William, the publisher of Lovecraft, with his history here. Ok, temos esse inicinho que eu acho que eu posso ler, mas eu queria focar mais em ler um conto. Deixa eu ver. Let me see. Dagon, the state statement of Randolph Carter, Harvest West Reanimator. Eu acho que eu vou ler Dagon. Dagon is a famous one. O Dagon é uma história bem famosa, Dagon. Então, vou estar lendo o conto aqui em inglês. I'll be reading it. Okay, so let's go. Vamos lá. Dagon. I'm writing this under an appreciable mental strain, since by tonight I shall be no more. Penniless and at the end of my supply of the drug which alone makes life unbearable. I can bear the torture no longer, and shall cast myself from this garret window into the squalid street below. Do not think from my slavery to morphine that I'm a weakling or a degenerate. When you have read these hastily scrawled pages, you may guess, though never fully realize, why is that I must have forgetfulness or death. I was in one of the most open and least frequented parts of the broad Pacific, that the packet of which I was supercargo fell a victim to the German sea raider. The Great War was then at its very beginning, and the ocean forces of the Hun had not completely sunk to their later degradation. So our vessel was made a legitimate prize, whereso we of her crew were treated with all the fairness and consideration due our captors. The 5 days after we were taken, I managed to escape alone in a small boat with water and provisions for a good length of time. When I finally found myself adrift and free, I had but a little idea of my surroundings, never a competent navigator. I could only guess vaguely by the sun and stars that I was somewhat south of the equator. Of the longitude I knew nothing, and no island or coastline was in sight. The weather kept fair, and for uncounted days I drifted aimlessly beneath the scorching sun, waiting either for some passing ship or to be cast on the shores of some habitable land. But neither ship nor land appeared, and I began to despair in my solitude upon the heavy vastness of unbroken blue. The change happened whither I slept. Its tales I shall never know, for my slumber, though troubled and dream infested, was continuous. When at least I waked, it was to discover myself after sucked into a slimy expanse of hellish black mire, which extended about me in monotonous undulations as far as I could see, and in which my boat lay grounded some distance away. Though one might well imagine that my first sensation will be of wonder, and so prodigious and unexpected a transformation of scenery, I was really more horrified than astonished, for this was in the air and in the rotting soil a sinister quality which chilled me to the very core. The region was buttered with the carcasses of decaying fish and of the other less describable things which I saw protruding from the nasty mud of the unending plain. Perhaps I should not hope to convey in mere words the unutterable hideousness that can dwell in absolute silence and bearing immensity. There was nothing within hearing and nothing in sight, save a vast reach of black slime. Yet the very completeness of the stillness and the homogeneity of the landscape oppressed me with a nauseating fear. The sun was blazing down from the sky, which seemed to me almost black in its cloudless crudity, as though reflecting the inky marsh beneath my feet. As I crawled into the stranded boat, I realized that only one theory could explain my position. Through some unprecedented volcanic upheaval, a portion of the ocean floor must have been thrown to the surface, exposing regions which for innumerable millions of years had lain hidden under unfathomable watery depths. Sorry about my English. Sorry for my English. Whatever. So great was the extent of the new land which had risen beneath me that I could not detect the faintest noise of the surging ocean strain my ears as I might, nor were there any sea fowl to prey upon the veins. For several hours I sat thinking or brooding in the boat, which lay upon its side and afforded a slight shade as the sun lost some of its thickness. The sun moved across the heavens. As the day progressed, the ground lost some of its thickness and seemed likely to dry sufficiently for traveling purpose in a short time. That night I slept but a little, and the next day I made for myself a bag containing food and water, preparatory to an overland journey in search of the vanished sea and possible rescue. On the third morning, I found the soil dry enough to walk upon with ease. The odor of the fish was maddening, but I was too much concerned with graver things to mind, so I forged steadily westward, guided by a faraway hummock desert. That night I camped, and on the following day still traveled towards the hummock, though the object seemed scarcely nearer than when I had first spied it. By the fourth evening I attained the base of the mount, which turned out to be much higher than it had appeared from a distance, and general surface and intervening valleys setting it out in sharper relief from the general surface. Too weary to ascend, I slept in the shadow of the hill. I know not why my dreams were so wide that night, but ere the waning and fantastically gibbous moon had risen far above the eastern plain, I was awake in a cold perspiration, determined to sleep no more. Such visions as I had experienced were too much for me to endure again, and in the glow of the moon I saw how unwise I had been to travel by day without the glare of the parching sun. My journey would have cost me less energy indeed. I now felt quite able to perform the ascent which had deterred me at the sunset. Picking up my pack, I started for the crest of the eminence. I have said that the unbroken monotony of the rolling plain was a source of vague horror to me, but I think my horror was greater when I gained the summit of the mound and looked down the other side into an immeasurable pit or canyon whose black recesses the moon had not yet soared high enough to illuminate. I found myself on the edge of the world, peering over the rim into a fathomless chaos of eternal night. Through my terror ran curious reminiscences of paradise lost and Satan's hideous through the unfashioned realms of darkness. As the moon climbed higher in the sky, I began to see that the slopes of the valley were not quite so perpendicular as I had imagined. Ledges and outcroppings of rock afforded fairly easy footholds for a descent. We saw after a drop of a few hundred feet the declivity became very gradual, urged on by an impulse which I cannot definitely analyze. I scrambled beneath, gazing into the Stygian deeps where no light had yet penetrated. All at once my attention was captured by a vast and singular object on the opposite slope, which rose steeply about 100 yards ahead of me, an object that gleamed whitely in the newly bestowed rays of the ascending moon. That it was merely a giant piece of stone, I soon assured myself, but I was conscious of a distant impression that its contour and position were not altogether the work of nature. A closer scrutiny filled me with sensations I cannot express, for despite its enormous magnitude and its position in an abyss which had yawned at the bottom of the sea since the world was young, I perceived beyond a doubt that this strange object was a well-shaped monolith, whose massive bulk had known the workmanship and perhaps the worship of living and thinking creatures. Dazed and frightened, yet not without a certain thrill of the scientist's or archaeologist's delight, I examined my surroundings more closely. The moon, now near the zenith, shone weirdly and vividly above the towering steeps that hemmed in the chasm and revealed the fact that a far-flung body of water flowed at the bottom, winding out of sight in both directions and almost slapping my feet as I stood on the slope. Across the chasm, the wavelets washed the base of the cyclopean monolith, on whose surface I could now trace both inscriptions and crude sculptures. The writing was in a system of hieroglyphics unknown to me, and unlike anything I had ever seen in books, consistent for the most part of conventionalized aquatic symbols such as fishes, eels, octopus, crustaceans, mollusks, whales, and the like. Several characters obviously represented marine things, which are unknown to the modern world, but whose decomposing forms I had observed on the ocean rising plain. I was the pictorial of carving. However, what that did most to hold me spellbound, plainly visible across the intervening water on account of their enormous size, was an array of bas-reliefs whose subjects would have excited the envy of a Dore. I think that these things were supposed to depict men, at least a certain sort of men, though the creatures were shown deporting like fishes in the waters of some marine grotto, or paying homage at some monolithic shrine which appeared to be under the waves as well. Of their faces and forms I dare not speak in detail, for the mere remembrance makes me groan faint. Grotesque beyond the imagination of a poet or a poet, they were damnably human in general, outlined despite webbed hands and feet, jokingly wild, and flappy lips, glassy, bulging eyes, and other features less pleasant to recall. Curiously enough, they seem to have been chiseled badly out of proportion with their scenic background, for I remarked, as I say, their grotesqueness and strange size, but in a moment decided that they were merely the imaginary gods of some primitive fishing or seafaring tribe, some tribe whose last descendant had perished years before the first ancestor of the Piltdown or Newtontown man was born. I was struck at this unexpected glimpse into a past beyond the conception of the most darling anthropologist. I stood musing while I saw the moon cast queer reflections on the silent channel before me. Then suddenly I saw it, with only a slight churning to mark its rise to the surface. The thing slid into view above the dark waters. Vast, polyphemus-like and loathsome, it darted like a stupendous monster of nightmares to the monolith, about which flung its gigantic scaly arms, the while it bowed its hideous head and gave vent to certain measured sounds. I think I went mad then, of my frantic ascent of the slope and cliff, and of my delirious journey back to the stranded boat. I remember little. I believe I sang a great deal, and laughed oddly when I was unable to sing. I have then distinct recollections of a great storm. Some time after I reached the boat. At any rate, I know that I heard the peals of one thunder and other tones which nature utters only in her widest moods. When I came out of the shadows, I was in a San Francisco hospital, brought thither by the captain of the American ship, which had picked up my boat in mid-ocean. In my delirium, I had said much, but found that my words had been given scant attention. Of any land upheaval in the Pacific, my rescuers knew nothing, nor did I deem it necessary to insist upon a thing which I knew they could not believe. Once I sought out a celebrated ethnologist and amused him with peculiar questions regarding the ancient Philistine legend of Dagon, the fish god, but soon perceiving that it was hopelessly conventional, I did not press my inquiries. It is at night, especially when the moon is dubious and warning that I see the thing. I try morphine, but the drug has given only transient surcease, and has drawn me into its clutches as a hopeless slave. So now I am to the end at all, having written a full account for the information or the contemptuous amusement of my fellow men. Often I ask myself if it could all been a pure phantasm, a mere freak of fever, as I lay sun-stricken and raving in the open boat after my escape from the German man of war. This I ask myself, but ever does there come before me a hideous vivid vision in reply. I cannot think of the deep sea without shuddering at the nameless things that might at this very moment be crowded and floundering on its slimy bed, worshipping their ancient stone idols, and carving their own detestable likeness on submarine obelisks of water-soaked granite. I dream of a day when they may rise above the billows to drag down in their reeking dens the remnants of bunny war-exhausted mankind. Of a day when the land shall sink and the dark ocean floor shall ascend amidst the universal pandemonium. The end is near. I hear a noise at the door, as noise of some immense slippery body lumbering against it. It shall not find me. God, the hand, the window, the window. Esse foi o conto Dagon. Você gostou? Comenta aí pra eu saber o que você achou. Agora eu tô com sono. Eu estava indo dormir, eu tava sem sono e vim gravar e aí me deu sono. Então eu te desejo uma boa noite, um bom descanso. Te desejo toda a paz do mundo. Dorme bem, fica bem, se cuida. Tchauzinho, 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 tchauzinho.